Hey everyone! So this is going to be a short tutorial on delivering a speech more effectively. So this is going to be specifically a little bit more concentrated on nonverbals that accompany your speech. So in a different video, I'll talk about the specifics of what you need to be doing when you are in the recording for your speech. Make sure you watch that. That one will be real short and just has the bullet points. This is going to be more about like what kind of things you should be doing and being considerate of. So we'll start with eye contact. I know this is a little weird because you don't necessarily have an audience. So do your best to make sure that you're looking in the camera at least about 80% of the time. The goal here when we're thinking about delivery, so if I was to give you advice about what to consider in terms of eye contact when you are in a classroom environment or any, with a live audience, the rule is usually 80-20. 80% up looking around at the audience, 20% glancing down at your notes. With this, I understand that it is a little weird it feels a little bit robotic to be staring directly into a camera the whole time. So when I say 80% not looking at your notes, if you want to glance around a little bit, that's okay, but we should have primarily you looking into the camera, so do your best on that. Specifically, be careful if you are using a phone and you're making it so that you can see yourself. The tendency is to watch yourself when you are presenting. Make sure you're actually looking at the camera. It's not a huge distinction, but it does make a difference when we're watching the speech. And I also included this handout as a PDF to you all because I realized that for this class, we're specifically in a classroom situation, we're specifically in an online situation, but I also want you to have some resources for when you do give presentations outside of this specifically weird experience. When you are face-to-face with people, think about when you're giving eye contact, you want to make sure you're encompassing all areas of the room. You're not just looking at one location. I know it's a little bit weird with the recording where I'm encouraging you more to look right into the camera more often. So I'm going to move on now to body movement. So for your recorded speech, you should be standing and we should see you from about the waist up. So we want to be able to see your hand gestures. Make sure you're thinking about standing up straight. That helps you to project your voice a little bit more. And then in terms of hand gestures, my best advice for you is to put your hands together in front of you and then kind of stop thinking about your hands. That's the best advice I was always given, and I think it's really helpful in thinking about, like, we tend to get a little bit too in our heads about, oh my god, what do I do with my hands? Put them together in front of you, stop thinking about them, and you will use them naturally. You may also have note cards with you. I understand that not everyone has note cards in their house, so if you'd like, what I encourage you to do is write your notes on, if you have to rip up a piece of paper and use something that's about the size of a note card, or if you have note cards, use note cards, just because that helps to convey a little bit more professionalism, but it's also a good habit to get into. It usually lends itself, using note cards, to a better delivery. It sounds more conversational. And I think it's worth pointing out here, you've seen it written in a lot of different locations, but I want to reemphasize the type of delivery that we're utilizing for this speech is extemporaneous, which essentially means it's spoken from notes. So you've taken the time to prepare, but you haven't committed the entire speech word for word to memory. You also haven't written it all out. The reason we do this type of speech delivery style is because it lends itself to the most interaction with the audience. It sounds the most conversational, so it's the easiest to listen to and engage with, but also it's probably the most common type of speech that you'll be giving in your life. Oftentimes we see people in business situations using extemporaneous speaking. In other academic situations you might be in, even in your personal life. Oftentimes we'll see people using extemporaneous delivery style when, for instance, you're giving a toast at a wedding or a eulogy at a funeral. Those type of special occasion speeches also, oftentimes you'll use an outline because you really don't often have time to sit down and word for word write everything out. And even if you do, that really prohibits the delivery. It impedes the type of inflection you can have because a reading rhythm does sound different than if you're just speaking from notes. So keep that in mind. All of this is to encourage that extemporaneous delivery style. Also, I'm going to pause right now and say I am really sorry my dog is eating behind me, and I am sure that is really loud and hopefully not too annoying. Okay, so in terms of body movement, we'll go back to that. Again, use your hands naturally. It's okay if you have your note cards in your hand or your paper ripped up like note cards. That's totally fine. You can also stand in front of a table or counter if you'd like somewhere to put your notes. Be careful when you're standing that you don't lock your knees. If you stand with your knees locked for too long, it actually can cut off the blood supply and people pass out. I don't anticipate that happening, but I also don't want that to happen. So friendly reminder, and again, good information to know in future speeches you might give. And then for these, in terms of attire, you should look put together. I know that we're all at home recording these, and I empathize with that. I'd say, put on a shirt that isn't distracting. Definitely put on clothing, please. One thing to think about is just how it feels moving. And fortunately, because you're recording yourself, you'll be able to see how like your hair and your clothing choices are impacting you. But oftentimes we'll see people, if they have slightly longer hair, if they look down for their notes, it starts to get in their face and it becomes a bit of a distraction. So just make sure you're noticing those things and reducing or eliminating those distractions that you may have. Moving on now to vocal inflection. Now, it's really important when you're recording your speech that you're projecting enough that whoever's watching the video can easily hear you. That's one challenge we sometimes have when watching these speeches that have been recorded. So making sure that you are projecting well enough the video or the recording can pick you up. Of course, when you're in face-to-face presentations, you want to make sure you're projecting clearly to the back of the room. The rate should be about a conversational rate. So the rate I'm speaking at right now as I'm going through these delivery components is about the right rate. You might be a little faster, you might be a little slower. There's certainly wiggle room on either side. But really think about the rate you speak when you are in conversation with someone, and that's a good rule of thumb to work with because we want this to sound natural to you. Some people naturally speak just a little quicker. Some people speak a little a little slower naturally. That's okay. Expression. So this is the big thing, and this is really the primary reason that we utilize the extemporaneous delivery style is expression in your voice, expression and inflection. So think about, as you are practicing your speech out loud, and injecting that expression and inflection in. So when you're trying to make a point, use your voice to make a point. And if you're trying to create some anticipation, it's okay to utilize your voice. If you want to show how excited you are, or if it's something that's solemn and it's something that we need to be ruminating on, use your voice as a tool to help convey what kind of emotion you want the audience to be feeling, or how you want the audience to focus on what you're saying. So expression and inflection are critical. This is the reason we don't read our speeches and we don't commit them fully to memory. It's because when you have something that you're reading, you have a different rhythm in your voice than when you speak conversationally, and you end up reducing a lot of that inflection that you have naturally in your voice. So be thoughtful about that, because this is what's going to help the audience follow along and engage with what you're saying. And then the last thing to keep in mind in terms of voice is consistency, and specifically be careful to not trail off at the end of sentences. So sometimes we'll have people who start really strong, so they'll be talking about expression is really important to the speech. And then the next sentence is really strong, and then they kind of trail off. Make sure that you're ending each sentence with a period or the appropriate pronunciation. On that same topic, make sure that you're not up-talking at the end of the sentence. So up-talking is when every statement you say sounds like a question because your voice gets high at the end. That's called up-talking. Make sure that, again, the tone of your voice conveys the appropriate punctuation. All right, and then facial expressions. So in terms of facial expressions, the biggest thing that you want to make sure that you're doing is ensuring that your facial expressions match the tone of the speech. Same goes for the vocal inflection, right? So for instance, if I'm talking about a really serious issue, I wouldn't want to be smiling the whole time. I tell this story in class often. I had a student a few years ago who gave a really well-researched presentation on the Holocaust. unfortunately, her go-to expression when she was nervous was to smile. And so she was telling us about all the people that died and how tragic it was. And it was a real, we were having a lot of trouble engaging with what she was saying, because especially when your facial expressions aren't matching the tone, we as an audience are going, wait, why is this? Are you making fun of this? Why are we seeing this discrepancy? And it can be really distracting to the presentation. So make sure facial expressions match the tone. If you're talking about something humorous, it's fine to smile. I'm not telling you not to smile ever, but I am telling you, think about what is the tone of the speech, especially in the moment, and what should your face be showing the audience how to feel about that. And then I also encourage you to practice your speech, record yourself, and then watch it back and see. Oftentimes we don't realize both the verbal and the nonverbal tics we may have, and being more aware of those can help you reduce them. The last thing that I want to touch on are some don'ts for delivery. So I know this one, again, this is more prevalent in face-to-face presentations. You don't want to stare at the back wall. You would want to be making eye contact with people. You also don't want to turn away from the audience at any point. The other big thing, do not speak in a monotone. So we don't want our speeches that are like this the whole time, where it kind of sounds like you don't care about the topic, and it doesn't really seem like we should care about the topic because you don't really care, and it's all kind of one tone. Please don't do that. You have an opportunity to talk about something that you chose, which makes me assume that you care about this topic. Show us how much you care about it using your voice. Your voice is one of the most valuable tools that you have as a speaker. So really be thinking about that. Practice using your voice. And if you're having trouble with that inflection component, try to, lock yourself in a room or in your car or somewhere and way overact it a couple times, just to help get you out of your comfort zone, so that when you do kind of pull it back to a more appropriate for a speech level, you won't feel as weird utilizing that inflection. All right, so those are the big things to think about when you're putting together the delivery for your speech for this class, but also for any other speeches you might give. And again, I want to emphasize, this is your tool. Utilize your tool to make for an effective speech.